it didn't begin with a bang. It began with a hum. A quiet shuffle of feet on a dusty back road. The low strum of a guitar heard through a cracked open window. A voice rising in the dark. It came softly, like smoke curling from a chimney, like rhythm finding breath. Rock and roll wasn't born in a stadium or beneath flashing lights. It was born on porches, in juke joints, in churches that shook with song, in back rooms and broadcast towers, and the slow, steady sway of teenagers dancing with their eyes closed. Long before it had a name, it had a heartbeat. A steady thump beneath layers of blues and gospel, jazz and country. A rhythm shaped by calloused hands, tired joy, and unshakable spirit. This is the story of where that sound began, quietly, gently, in places you might not expect. Welcome to Sleepy Journeys, the podcast designed to lull you into a peaceful slumber with soothing stories through time, places, and ideas. Whether you're winding down after a long day or simply looking for a peaceful escape, you're in the right place. My name's Jack, and I'm so happy to have you here with me. Each night on Sleepy Journeys, we set off together on gentle adventures designed to soothe your mind and ease you into rest. You'll find journeys through history, comforting fairy tales, myths and folklore, the wonders of science, fascinating inventions, inspiring famous figures, music history, and even calm explorations around the world. No matter where your curiosity takes you, there's a dreamy, Sleepy Journeys show for you. Tonight, we're going to embark on a gentle journey through the birth of rock and roll. We'll drift back to the Mississippi Delta, to chapels with handclaps and hallelujahs, to radios glowing in the dark. We'll follow the soft roll of a boogie-woogie piano, the shimmer of harmony beneath city lamplight, and the warm hiss of a vinyl record just beginning to spin. And just before we fully drift off, if you're enjoying Sleepy Journeys, go ahead and tap follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're joining me on. That way, you won't miss any of our upcoming sleepy adventures. And let us know in the comments where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us. Now, take a breath. Let your body relax. Let the rhythm settle into your chest, slow and sure. The story is waiting. The needle is about to drop, and rock and roll, soft, patient, and ready, is about to begin. Picture a dusky southern evening. The porch light flickers above weathered steps, and the faint echo of a steel-string guitar lingers in the humid air. Somewhere nearby, a gentle shuffle of feet taps along a dusty back road, matching a quiet beat rising from a cracked open window. In the distance, a radio glows on a windowsill, playing low, a whisper of something new, something waiting to become a movement. This is where our journey begins, not with stadiums or screaming crowds, but with soul and story, with fingertips pressing into strings and voices rising in harmony under starlit skies. Before rock and roll filled the airwaves and arenas, before it spun out into the arms of teenagers and tucked itself into jukebox corners, it was a feeling. A gentle blend of blues, gospel, swing, and longing. It was born not all at once, but like a tide coming in, each wave carrying a new sound, a new rhythm, a new heartbeat. As we drift through this sleepy musical history, we'll touch down in the deep South, where sorrow turned to song. We'll glide through smoky jazz clubs and stop by roadside diners, where coin-operated jukeboxes spun out dreams on 45s. We'll visit quiet recording studios where producers chased echoes and warmth, and hear the rustle of dresses and greased hair as teenagers danced under neon signs. But this is not a story of noise. Tonight, we listen for the gentle pulse beneath it all. For the bass thump that's more like a lullaby. For the sway in a voice that carries hope through a trembling microphone. This journey isn't about the loudness of rock and roll. It's about its soul, its soft beginnings, its gentle rise. So settle in. Let your breath match the rhythm of the night. Let the music of memory wash over you, warm and low. There's no rush. Just the quiet bloom of something eternal, something that will carry you softly through time. Rock and roll is waiting. Down in the Mississippi Delta, where the earth is dark and rich and the air hums with stillness, something began to stir long before anyone called it rock and roll. It stirred in cotton fields under blistering sun, in the soft scuff of boots on dusty roads, and in the tired rhythm of hands at work. It wasn't yet music with a name, but it was music. It was pain turned to sound, sorrow turned to story, and hope passed down on worn strings and broken frets. The blues, soft and raw, were born from this soil. Not loud or theatrical at first. No, they came in murmurs and moans. They slipped out of porches late at night, floated across bayous, and filled the silences between days with meaning. The earliest blues weren't written down. They were felt, shared, breathed, sometimes hummed between chores, or sung into the wind while walking home beneath the moon. You could hear it in the voice of a lone singer, cradling a guitar like a child. The notes weren't clean or perfect. They bent, wandered, and ached. But in their ache, there was truth. Musicians like Charlie Patton, Son House, and later Robert Johnson didn't invent the blues, they channeled it. Like hollowed reeds in the current, they carried the river of emotion that flowed through generations. Their instruments were often crude. A guitar might be missing a string or two. A harmonica might wheeze more than sing. But oh, the sound that rose from them. It was storytelling in slow motion. About losing love. About waiting for a letter that never came. About long journeys and empty pockets. And always about that longing for something more. The Delta blues was quiet power. It didn't need a stage. It lived on front steps and in fields, at train depots and street corners. It curled into every corner of daily life. The beat was the beat of work, steady, deliberate, and unbreakable. The melodies rose and fell like the breath of someone too tired to stand, but still singing anyway. And beyond the lyrics, beyond the chords, there was something else, an early form of defiance. Not loud, not shouted, but present. A song that said, "I am here. I feel. I matter." The blues gave voice to the voiceless, comfort to the weary, and rhythm to lives often measured by hardship. These early songs wouldn't be played on national radio. They wouldn't fill dance halls or stadiums. Not yet. But they were seeds, rich, aching, and real, planted in the warm, waiting soil of the American South. And when the wind blew across the Delta, it carried those notes, softened by distance, across fences, across towns, across time. It carried them into the ears of children, of travelers, of dreamers. It carried them forward, towards something that hadn't yet been named, but was already being born. In quiet chapels and clapboard churches scattered across the southern United States, another sound was rising, one built not from sorrow alone, but from faith, hope, and praise. Gospel music was a river of warmth flowing through congregations, lifted by hands clapping in time and voices reaching upward like tendrils of smoke. Unlike the solitary ache of the blues, gospel was collective. It was communal uplift, a group of people declaring joy even in the face of hardship. The rhythms of gospel were familiar, yet uplifting. Simple chords built upon one another like bricks in a sanctuary wall, and voices blended into waves that washed over every heart present. A choir in full harmony could move a room to tears without a single instrument. The beat might be kept by a foot stomp on a wooden floor, or by palms pressed together in perfect time. It was more than music. It was medicine. In these spaces, young voices were shaped. Many of the singers who would one day carry the sound of rock and roll to the world first sang in pews under tin roofs. They learned breath control singing spirituals. They learned how to rise with the swell of a chorus and how to hold an audience with nothing more than voice and presence. Mahalia Jackson, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Sam Cooke, all began in the echo of gospel, where the voice became a sacred instrument. But gospel didn't stay behind stained glass windows. It wandered. It seeped into the street corners, into alleyways and barbershops, where harmony was less about religion and more about kinship. Doo-wop and street corner harmony began with young men gathering under lamplight, tuning their voices to one another like stars aligning. They sang for fun, for friendship, for girls leaning out of windows to listen. Their harmonies weren't rehearsed in grand halls, but found in stairwells and stoops. The doo-wop groups borrowed the group dynamic of gospel and the emotional weight of blues, and layered them with playful rhythm and a touch of romance. There was always a bass voice grounding the sound, a soaring tenor lifting it skyward, and a middle harmony gently stitching everything together. Together, their voices created a kind of intimacy, a closeness that could be felt even through a crackling radio speaker. On summer nights in the city, those harmonies floated through open windows, catching the ears of children falling asleep and adults returning from long shifts. They were lullabies with backbeat, soft enough to soothe, but strong enough to stir. Soul music was being born in these spaces too, where gospel's spiritual lift met the emotional gravity of secular longing. It didn't take long before those church singers began shifting their songs ever so slightly. From "Take My Hand, Precious Lord" to "You Send Me," from call and response hymns to velvet-voiced ballads about love lost and found. And the emotion remained just as pure. This gentle convergence, gospel's spirit, blues rawness, and doo-wop's charm, laid a tender, trembling foundation beneath rock and roll. It gave it its heart, its hope, its ache, and its healing. And all of it, every hand clap, every harmony, was preparing the world for something louder that still carried the echo of the soft. In the quiet hours after dark, when the day's dust had settled, and neon signs began to glow in the city's corners, a new sound stirred beneath the soft clink of glasses and the low hum of conversation. In jazz clubs tucked into alleys and neighborhood bars pulsing with life, music with movement began to rise, something that made feet tap before minds even noticed. This wasn't the slow ache of the Delta blues or the soaring praise of gospel. It was swing. And it didn't ask for permission. It simply invited bodies to sway, fingers to snap, and hearts to lift just a little higher. Born in smoky rooms and crafted by ensembles big and small, swing music was built on rhythm, reliable, bouncing rhythm. The kind that made the corners of your mouth lift before your thoughts caught up. Bass lines plucked steadily along, drums brushed and tapped in syncopated patterns, and horn sections swelled like gentle waves, pushing dancers into graceful steps. Though often associated with big band orchestras, swing had a soft, driving energy that crept into popular culture like a whisper through a door cracked just enough to let light in. It wasn't just meant for listening, it was meant for moving. Even the quietest corners of towns found space for small swing bands on makeshift stages, while jitterbugs twirled in borrowed shoes beneath strings of paper lanterns. The swing rhythm was infectious. It brought a lightness after hard days. It said, "Come dance. Just for a while, forget the weight of things. Let the music carry you." It was also the perfect bridge between the soulful pull of older traditions and something looser, something younger. Musicians who had grown up on blues and gospel began to adopt the swing style, adding their own flavors. The result was a gentle fusion, soft at first, but unmistakably new. A little faster, a little bolder, but always smooth, always smiling. As swing spilled into juke joints and ballrooms, another piece of the rock and roll puzzle quietly clicked into place. It was a groove that didn't shout, but insisted. That kept dancers moving late into the night. That lived in the shuffle of shoes and the smile behind closed eyes. Outside of the clubs, the music found new life in diners and drugstores, where jukeboxes stood like altars to rhythm. Teenagers slid coins into their metal slots and leaned in close as the record dropped, the stylus gliding across vinyl like a whisper of magic. The music that had once lived in crowded city clubs now played softly beside milkshakes and checkered floors. Swing had gone from stage to street corner, and its influence was everywhere. The jukebox, too, played a quiet but vital role. It didn't just deliver music, it chose favorites. It helped define hits. It allowed people to hear what they loved again and again. And in doing so, it became part of their memory, of their laughter, their dances, their drifting moments between day and night. The stage was gently shifting. Swing had laid the rhythm, steady and sure. And something was beginning to rise within that groove, something that would one day shout. But for now, only swayed. There's a certain rhythm that lives in the fingertips. Not rushed, not forced, just steady, like a heartbeat that's learned how to smile. This was the magic of boogie woogie, a piano style that didn't ask for attention, but commanded it all the same. With its rolling bass lines and joyful energy, it crept into kitchens, back rooms, and small-town dance halls, tapping its way into hearts long before the term rock and roll ever made its way to a marquee. Boogie woogie was born in the spaces between the blues and the beat, down in Texas, in Louisiana, in dusty corners where pianos were out of tune but still full of life. The sound started at the bottom, with a walking bass figure played in steady eighth notes, moving like the soft thump of shoes along wooden floorboards. It was repetition, but never dull. The left hand kept time like a metronome, while the right hand danced, skipping, improvising, riffing in playful flurries of sound. This wasn't concert hall music. This was front porch music, barrel house music, played on upright pianos with chipped keys and stories in their strings. It moved people, not in grand gestures, but in toe taps, in hips that swayed without meaning to, in shoulders that rocked gently to the groove. Songs like Pine Top's Boogie Woogie, Honky Tonk Train Blues, and later Boogie Woogie Stomp became quiet anthems for a kind of joyful movement. They weren't showpieces. They were invitations. The artists who played them, Meade Lux Lewis, Albert Ammons, Pete Johnson, weren't seeking fame. They were chasing a feeling. And when they played, the room changed. The music didn't start with a bang, but with a roll, a rise, a suggestion that something exciting, something irresistible was coming. Boogie Woogie was also deeply generous. It welcomed others to join in, to clap, to sing, to play. And it passed itself on easily. Young musicians, fascinated by the style, took its rolling bass and added their own voices. Guitarists translated it into their chords. Drummers matched its shuffle. And just like that, the style began to spread. Its influence seeped quietly into early rock and roll. You can hear it in the chugging rhythm of a Chuck Berry riff, in the bounce of a Little Richard piano line. Even Elvis, when he first tapped his heel on a studio floor, was feeling the pulse that Boogie Woogie had laid down decades earlier. There's a reason the beat is hard to ignore. It's not just the tempo, it's the joy. Boogie Woogie plays like a smile, like a night you didn't expect to be special that somehow became unforgettable. It doesn't ask you to dance, it dances first and trusts that you'll follow. And so, long before rock and roll had a name, it had a beat. A warm, walking, rolling rhythm that made the world feel just a little lighter. a rhythm that still lives, soft and steady, in the spaces between songs. There's a quiet in Memphis unlike anywhere else, a kind of hush that lives in the air between the pulse of streetcars and the bend of the Mississippi River. It's not silence exactly, but something more watchful, more reverent. And tucked into that hush, once upon a time, was a little studio that didn't look like much from the outside. Just a low-slung brick building with a modest sign. But within its walls, sound took on new shape. And what began there would ripple gently out into the world. Sun Records. Founded by Sam Phillips in the early 1950s, Sun wasn't built on grandeur. It was built on belief. Belief that raw talent, untouched, unpolished, and unrehearsed, could be something beautiful. That voices from back roads and barbershops could carry just as much power as those groomed for concert halls. That rhythm and soul, captured in a room with cracked floors and tin ceilings, could become something timeless. The studio was small, but alive. The walls weren't lined with gold, but with sound, the kind that lingered. If you stood very still, you could hear the echoes of guitar strings twanging, of someone tapping their foot just slightly out of time, of a voice cracking not from mistake, but from emotion. Sam Phillips had an ear not just for music, but for honesty. He didn't want perfection. He wanted presence, energy, something that felt true. He'd invite musicians to play until the room warmed, until the rhythm settled into something natural, something inevitable. And then, with the flick of a switch, he'd press record. One of the most distinctive things about the Sun sound was its echo, a natural reverb created by the shape of the studio itself. It wrapped each note in softness, made it feel like it had come from down the road, around the corner, just out of reach. That echo would become a signature, something that made every track sound like memory. Artists like Howlin' Wolf, Ike Turner, and B.B. King passed through Sun's doors in those early years. Each left behind a mark, a whisper, a seed. They brought blues and grit, rhythm and spark, and Sam Phillips captured it all, often with little more than a microphone, a reel of tape, and a belief that what he was hearing mattered. What made Sun different wasn't the equipment. It was the atmosphere, the comfort, the way musicians felt when they walked in, nervous maybe, but safe. Free to play, not what they were told, but what they felt. This was the sound of change. Not shouted, not staged. Just played, gently and honestly, in a room that understood. And before long, one young man would walk in through Sun's doors and turn that echo into something that would hum forever through the heart of rock and roll. But for now, the studio waited. The mic stood ready. The room held its breath. And somewhere down the street, footsteps approached, easy, uncertain, and ready to become legend. He didn't look like a revolution. Just a shy young man with tousled hair and a guitar slung over his shoulder, stepping quietly into a studio he'd passed many times before. His name was Elvis Presley, and on that day in 1953, He walked into Sun Records not to make history, but to make a record for his mother. A birthday gift, simple and personal. He paid a small fee, stood before a microphone, and sang softly into the warm hush of the studio. What came out wasn't earth-shattering. Not yet. But Sam Phillips, listening from the other room, heard something he couldn't forget. It wasn't the polish of the voice, it was the feel. Something tender and searching. Something between gospel and country, blues and ballad. Something that felt like everything at once. A year later, Sam invited Elvis back, not entirely sure what he was looking for, only that the sound might be hiding in this soft-spoken truck driver from Memphis. They tried a few songs. They didn't quite click. The evening wore on. Then, as the session was winding down, Elvis picked up his guitar and began to play an old blues tune. That's all right. Not as it was meant to be played, but with a bounce, a grin, a kind of loose joy that made the whole room shift. The drummer joined in. The bass fell into place. Sam leaned forward. He hit record. What they captured was not rehearsed. It wasn't clean, but it was alive. Fresh. A blend of country twang and blues rhythm, gospel lift and swing sway. It felt like something new, even though every part of it had come from somewhere old. It was a fusion, but not forced. A meeting of sounds that had been waiting for each other all along. Elvis's voice had a gentle urgency to it, a curl at the edges, a flicker of mischief tucked inside its warmth. It made people lean in closer, not push away. And when that recording hit the local radio waves, listeners responded not with confusion, but with delight. They didn't know what it was. They just knew they wanted to hear it again. And again. It wasn't just that Elvis looked different. It wasn't just that he sang in a way no one had quite sung before. It was that he bridged gaps. He blurred lines between black and white music, between gospel and groove, between Saturday night rebellion and Sunday morning reflection. That first single, That's All Right, marked a quiet moment that grew louder over time. Not instantly, not overnight, but steadily, softly, like water seeping into cracks and changing the shape of stone. And through it all, the echo of Sun Records remained, wrapping his voice in memory, cradling the rhythm in reverb, letting the music grow not by pushing, but by pulling, gently, on every ear it touched. The boy who walked in to make a record for his mother had started something no one could stop. And rock and roll, still unnamed by many, was beginning to hum in the background of everything. The world was changing, softly but surely. After years of war and worry, a new kind of calm was settling over towns and cities. Streets were smoother, cars more affordable, and nights more open. And with this gentle shift came something new, not just in technology or economics, but in hearts and habits. Teenagers. Not just younger versions of adults, but a culture in themselves. With time to spare, money to spend, and ears ready to be enchanted. They didn't want ballroom strings or crooner ballads. They wanted rhythm, beat, songs that spoke not about distant dreams, but about now, about first loves, summer nights, and the longing for freedom whispered under the stars. And rock and roll, still finding its shape, was ready to meet them. Imagine a warm night in the mid-1950s. The sun has long since dipped behind the rooftops, and the sidewalks still hold a bit of its heat. Neon signs flicker in windows, diners open late, record shops aglow with soft amber light. The roads are alive with the slow cruise of shiny cars, Chevrolets, Buicks, Fords, all rolling gently down Main Street with radios humming low. From the open windows of those cars, the music spills out, not loud but insistent. There's a pulse in it, a slow thump of bass, the bright clang of electric guitar, the shake of a snare drum keeping time like a heartbeat with a smile. Singers croon about summer kisses, high school dances, and drive-in dreams. The teenagers lean back in their seats, one hand on the steering wheel, the other tapping to the beat. Their hair slicked back or curled soft with rollers. They are at ease, at the beginning of something. The music belongs to them now. It is their language, their lullaby, their quiet rebellion. In the diners, jukeboxes glow with glassy color. Small hands press buttons with certainty, A4, B7, C3, selecting favorite songs like spells. The discs spin. The needle drops. And just like that, the room fills with rhythm. Milkshakes clink on counters. Soda bubbles fizz softly in tall glasses. And conversations pause for just a moment when the first notes of a beloved tune begin. Rock and roll had become more than music. It had become a companion, a backdrop to youth, a soundtrack to slow dances, to late-night promises whispered behind bleachers, to the sound of tires on gravel as headlights stretched into dark roads. There was something innocent in it all, something gentle, even in its pulse. These were not the riotous anthems of later decades. These early hits had a smile in them, a croon, a sway. They rocked you not awake, but into movement, into softness. Teenagers, for the first time, had a sound that reflected them, not the world their parents knew, but the one they were just beginning to build. And rock and roll, like a knowing friend, walked beside them under neon lights and twilight skies. Before television flickered in every home, before portable cassette players and streaming apps, there was the radio, glowing softly in family rooms, perched on kitchen counters, tucked beside beds where it whispered into the ears of those drifting off to sleep. It wasn't just a machine. It was a companion. And as the 1950s unfolded, it became the quiet carriage that carried rock and roll across the country, 145 at a time. The 45 RPM record, small, circular, with a wide hole at its center, was the perfect size for dreams. Affordable, portable, and easy to stack in jukeboxes and record players, it changed how people collected music. No longer did you need a whole album to bring a voice into your home, just a single song, pressed into black vinyl, waiting to be spun again and again. And spinning them were the disc jockeys. Radio DJs in this era were more than announcers. They were curators of cool, quiet guides through the night air. With smooth voices and playful wit, they introduced the world to the sounds they loved, not from concert stages, but from behind microphones, surrounded by shelves of records and the gentle hum of transmission towers. Alan Freed in Cleveland coined the phrase rock and roll to describe the sound rising from the crossroads of rhythm and blues, gospel, and country. He didn't shout the term. He shared it, inviting listeners to hear something exciting yet warm, something new that still carried the soul of old traditions. DJs like Freed, Dewey Phillips in Memphis, and Wolfman Jack with his gravel soft howl broke musical boundaries simply by spinning records. They didn't always follow scripts. They played what moved them. And often, what moved them were the voices and rhythms of Black artists who, until that point, had been largely kept off the mainstream dial. The DJs brought those sounds into homes across America, into places that had never heard that kind of music before. They let the backbeat in. Let the hips start swaying. Let the hearts start listening differently. And all the while, the 45s turned. On radios in soda shops, in teenage bedrooms, on portable turntables in grassy fields or at slumber parties. Each record held not just a song, but a feeling, a memory, a promise. The hiss of the needle, the pop before the first note, that was the sound of something beginning. What was once music made in the corners of small clubs and southern shacks was now being carried gently through the night by invisible waves. Soft, steady, and sharp. Radio didn't make rock and roll louder. It made it closer, more personal, more real. And the 45, small and unassuming, helped people take that feeling home in their hands. It was the perfect delivery for music that wanted not just to be heard, but to be felt. A soft revolution spinning at 45 revolutions per minute. In the early days of rock and roll, the spotlight often shone on pompadoured men with guitars slung low and stage lights gleaming in their wake. But just beyond that bright circle stood the women, brilliant, bold, and often quietly extraordinary, whose voices added depth, color, and warmth to the music's rising tide. They were the harmonizers, the rhythm holders, the soulful singers who brought softness and strength in equal measure. Some stood center stage, guitars in hand, heels clicking softly against floorboards worn smooth by performance. Others harmonized in trios, perfectly in sync, their melodies rising like a sigh across vinyl grooves and radio waves. And all of them, every sister in song, carried the same rhythm in their bones, a rhythm born of resilience, longing, and the joy of expression. One of the earliest and most electrifying of these women was Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Long before the term rock and roll became popular, she stood in front of church congregations and roaring crowds with an electric guitar cradled in her arms, playing it with a fierce joy and a swing that made hips move and spirits rise. Her voice, gospel-rich and rhythm-strong, was full of invitation. She was part preacher, part performer, her music a blend of sacred and sway. And though the world wasn't always ready to recognize her as the godmother of rock, her echo lived in every riff that came after. Then there was Wanda Jackson, the queen of rockabilly. With her high-heeled stomp and sizzling yodel, she brought a fire all her own to the genre. Her songs weren't just love notes, they were declarations, filled with energy and edge. She toured with Elvis, matched male contemporaries in stage presence, and proved that rock could be feminine and fierce all at once. Beyond the solo acts, the girl groups of the late 1950s and early 60s began weaving magic of their own. Groups like the Shirelles, the Chantels, and the Bobettes sang in harmonies so smooth they felt like silk against skin. Their lyrics touched on young love, longing, and quiet rebellion, themes wrapped in soft vocals and catchy hooks. But underneath those polished arrangements were stories of agency and perspective. These weren't just love songs. They were emotional blueprints of a generation finding its voice. Their harmonies weren't just beautiful. They were precise, deliberate, filled with feeling. You could hear it in every sha-la-la, every echoing baby baby. These songs became lullabies for late-night drives, the soundtrack to slow dances, and the heartbeat of bedrooms where dreams bloomed behind closed doors. Even when industry doors closed too easily on women's ambitions, they kept singing. On backup mics, in writing rooms, on stages where their names were smaller, but their sound was essential. Their voices softened the edges of rock and roll's roar, adding shimmer to the swing, light to the drive, and heart to the rhythm. In every song that lingered in your mind long after the record stopped spinning, there was a woman's voice, sometimes leading, sometimes lifting, always lasting. And their legacy, though often whispered, is now part of the lullaby of music history. They didn't always take center stage. Their names were often missing from headlines, their stories left unwritten in the margins. But their presence was undeniable. In every harmony that lingered, in every lyric that struck a tender chord, in every note that found its way into your heart without fanfare, there too were the hidden women of early rock and roll. The ones whose influence moved quietly, like wind through tall grass. Steady, sure, unseen, but deeply felt. Some stood behind microphones as backup singers, rapping lead vocals in a warmth that gave the entire song its glow. Their harmonies were not decoration, they were foundation. These voices were the glue holding together some of the most beloved recordings of a generation. And still, they were rarely credited. Others worked in small studios and publishing houses, writing songs that would be made famous by others. Carole King, before she became a household name as a performer, spent her early years writing quiet gold from a Brill-building piano bench. She and her writing partner, Jerry Goffin, penned melodies that teenagers adopted as their own. Will You Love Me Tomorrow? One Fine Day, The Locomotion. Carole's chords were simple but deeply human, her lyrics tender and timeless. Her influence moved like a river beneath the surface of pop's landscape, slow, wide, and enduring. There were arrangers, too, behind the control panels and notation books. Women who understood how to shape sound, how to stack harmonies like stars, how to build something unforgettable out of something small. Many were uncredited. Some remained anonymous by circumstance. But their fingerprints were everywhere. And still others found their place as muses, stylists, managers, and connectors, rarely in the spotlight, but vital to the machinery of rock's early engine. They offered vision, helped shape image and tone, helped guide young artists who may never have found their voice without quiet encouragement or a whispered note of reassurance behind the curtain. Their stories were not always shouted. They moved in the quieter spaces, in the margins of liner notes, in photographs where they stood to the side, in anecdotes told years later in memoirs and interviews. But the influence they had, the whisper of their work, grew into something mighty. The texture of early rock and roll is richer because of them. The emotional depth deeper. The melodies more nuanced. And while the spotlight didn't always shine their way, the music itself never forgot. For every chart-topping single and iconic album cover, there was often a woman's voice, a woman's ear, a woman's hand guiding it into being. And though history may have left their names unspoken, their work hums on, gentle, golden, and quietly eternal. In the spaces between genres, something new always stirs. It hums gently at first, where sounds blend and boundaries blur. In the 1950s, as rock and roll began to take form, two styles began to ripple outward, rockabilly and doo-wop, each bringing with it a unique rhythm, a different flavor, and a quiet power to bridge cultures and communities. Rockabilly was restless, but charming. It was born where country twang met rhythm and blues swagger, often in southern towns where the crackle of AM radio carried the sounds of both Hank Williams and Big Joe Turner in the same breath. It had the slap of an upright bass, the snap of snare drums, and the twang of a guitar, played with personality. There was mischief in it. A grin behind the lyrics. A wink in the rhythm. Artists like Carl Perkins, Jerry Lee Lewis, and early Elvis brought rockabilly into the light. But it wasn't all about showmanship. At its heart, it was movement music. Music for driving with the windows down. Music that made the soles of your shoes bounce gently against floorboards. Songs like Blue Suede Shoes and Whole Lotta Shakin' Going On weren't just about rebellion. They were about freedom and feeling. A way of saying, I'm alive, with every backbeat. At the same time, in cities from Philadelphia to Detroit, doo-wop bloomed in the glow of street lamps and school gymnasiums. It was harmony, pure and simple. Doo-wop groups, often young, often close-knit, sang with a blend so smooth it felt like silk across the skin. No need for instruments beyond their voices. A bass vocal keeping time. A lead floating above. And the background singers weaving in and out like wind through tall grass. It was accessible. Anyone could sing doo-wop. And many did, gathering in stairwells and corners, learning their parts by ear and feeling. Groups like the Penguins, the Five Satins, and the Platters didn't just perform, they painted emotion in soft tones. Songs of love, loss, hope, and waiting beneath stars. These two genres, rockabilly and doo-wop, did more than chart hits. They crossed lines. They brought together sounds from black and white communities, from rural and urban backgrounds, from gospel and honky-tonk traditions. They were bridges, gently laid, between past and future, north and south, sacred and secular. And their reach extended further still. Young musicians on the edges of these movements, watching, listening, practicing, were quietly taking notes. In garages in Liverpool, in clubs in Hamburg, in quiet bedrooms across the world. They were hearing something not just fun, but real. Something raw and melodic, danceable and emotional. Something that felt both homemade and universal. The seeds of global rock had been planted. But before the explosion, before the Beatles stepped onto planes and the Rolling Stones onto stages, there was this quiet crossing. These gentle fusions. The sweet sway of doo-wop, the bouncing beat of rockabilly, styles that built a musical language capable of speaking to almost anyone. And in that lull between waves, the music waited. Before the roar of crowds, before the airport landings and screaming fans, before guitars blazed across transatlantic stages, there was a quiet. A soft ripple. A handful of young dreamers tuning in from across the sea. In England, in the late 1950s and early 1960s, radios picked up the sounds of America's rock and roll, and something began to stir. It was subtle at first. Boys with shaggy hair and borrowed guitars sat in bedrooms, leaning close to static-laced radios. They listened to Chuck Berry's riffs, Buddy Holly's earnest melodies, and Little Richard's thunderous piano. They memorized every word, every pause, every chord change. And then they played it back. Slowly, carefully, softly at first. Across Liverpool, London, and Manchester, small groups began to form. They weren't stars, not yet. They were kids mimicking records, practicing in garages, trying to recreate that feeling that came through the speaker, like lightning wrapped in rhythm. They studied not just the sound, but the energy behind it. The beat that made shoulders move. The lyric that lingered. The way a voice could lean into a microphone and make the world listen. American rock and roll records, especially the early ones, became sacred texts to this new generation. Songs by the Everly Brothers taught harmony. Elvis taught charisma. Bo Diddley brought rhythm. And from this stew of influences came a new sound, something rooted in rock's beginnings, but shaded by British skies and shaped by new voices. But the tone, even as it gained strength, remained humble. Early British rock and rollers, before fame, were imitators in the best sense. They revered the music. They honored its roots. They played it not for fame, but for joy, for curiosity, for the thrill of making something bigger than themselves. And still, America hardly knew what was coming. Meanwhile, the industry shifted. Record labels noticed the growing demand. Small clubs filled. Vinyl presses worked late. And slowly, a wave gathered strength. Not crashing yet, but lifting. Lifting a sound. Lifting a dream. The music that had started in the American South, in chapels, porches, juke joints, and Memphis studios, was now echoing through London basements and seaside dance halls. It had crossed oceans not with noise, but with resonance. It had spoken a universal language, and the reply was coming. When the British invasion finally arrived, it would come with volume, yes, with press and lights and hysteria. But before all that, there was this, a quiet echo heard by teenagers who dared to believe they could answer back. And they would. But for now, the guitars were still being tuned. The harmonies practiced. The dreams still taking form behind drawn curtains and bedroom walls. Rock and roll, barely a decade old, was already circling the globe, not in grand statements, but in whispers, in hums, in hearts. The rhythm softens now. The night has deepened, the echo of guitars fading gently into memory. Where once there was the thump of a bass line, now there is only the quiet hum of stillness, like the world holding its breath between records. The journey we've taken tonight, through rhythm and roots, voices and vinyl, rests now in the calm after the last note has played. Rock and roll didn't burst into the world with thunder. It arrived like a pulse. A low, steady heartbeat that gathered speed, gathered sound, and gathered souls. It rose not from glitter or fame, but from porches and pews, back rooms and basements. From the slow hands of blues musicians, from gospel choirs who swayed under candlelight, from teenage dreamers dancing beneath neon signs. And through it all, the beat remained. A whisper, not a roar. A shuffle, not a stomp. A rhythm that knew how to wait, patient, persistent, promising. We followed its early footsteps tonight. From the Delta's dusky fields to the velvet hush of Sun Records. From the rees of the 45 to the crackle of radio airwaves, all the way to the quiet corners of British bedrooms, where echoes turned into answers. What made the birth of rock and roll so special wasn't just the music. It was the way it made people feel. Like they belonged. Like they were heard. Like they were part of something timeless, even if only for the length of a 3-minute song. That feeling never left. It's there, even now, in the soft strum of an acoustic guitar, in a voice singing alone in a car at night, in the hum of an old record player spinning while the world falls asleep. And it's with you too. As you rest now, let the memory of those early rhythms settle into your breath. Let the voices, low, smooth, and warm, gather around you like a favorite blanket. Let your mind drift through jukeboxes and echo chambers, hand claps and harmonies, until everything quiets, and you are gently carried by the music of rest. The beat doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes the most enduring songs are the ones we hear just before we sleep. Thank you for joining me on tonight's journey. I hope it brought you a little peace, a little wonder, and a little closer to rest. Until next time, sweet dreams.